Good afternoon. My name is Colleen Penhall, and I'm the Chief Communications Officer at UNC Charlotte. Thanks for joining us today for this town hall for faculty and staff to discuss our return to full campus operations in this upcoming fall semester. I wanted to provide some feedback around how we're going to lead this session today. I'm going to start by asking several university leaders questions based on the inquiries we've received from you when you registered for today's town hall. After that, we're going to open it up to any questions that may be on your minds. You can submit those questions at any time using the chat function. And don't worry, because of the large number of folks that we have on this call today, you won't be able to see all those questions, but we have a team capturing all of them, and we're going to get to as many of your questions as we can today. Just as a reminder, if we don't get to any of your questions, we'll post the frequently asked questions on the Niner Nation Cares website after this town hall. We are also recording this town hall session, and we will post it on ninernationcares.uncc.edu. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started then. We're going to start, as I said, first by starting with the questions that are most on your minds that we received on social media as well as through our inquiry form. So Chancellor Gaber, we're going to go ahead and start with you. The first question is, in March, we announced that we were returning to full operations for the fall semester and that employees were expected to return to campus by July 6th. Is this still the case, and are we still preparing for a return to full operations in August?
Yes, well, thanks everybody. Thanks for being here. Short answer, yes, we are looking forward to seeing staff back on campus July 6th and faculty back on campus August 16th. And for everybody to know, we know that vaccination rates continue to rise, infection rates continue to fall, both in the state and the county and across the country. And we're optimistic to have a healthy, successful fall.
Okay, great. Well, speaking of vaccination rates, we have previously announced that the university will not require vaccinations for students and employees. Is that still accurate?
That is still accurate. What I will tell you is it is not required, although it is strongly encouraged for students, faculty, staff, and again, strongly encouraged. We know that vaccination is the best tool that we have to avoid COVID-19 serious illness associated with it, and we are strongly encouraging everyone. If anybody needs help locating a vaccination site, I would suggest you look at the Niner Nation Cares website. We will host some on-campus clinics again in August. I encourage you not to wait till then, though, when we know that they are throughout the community, and I think anyone here is happy to help anyone find them, but they are posted on the website. I will say, if you have had your vaccination, we strongly encourage you to complete the online reporting form. There are positives associated with this, like anybody who is tired of filling out the Niner health check. If you submit your form, you no longer have to do that. I have to say that changed my entire morning routine, okay? So, it was get up, do that first, and I submitted my vaccination form. So I was excited to no longer have to do that first thing in the morning. We do know currently that about 60% of our faculty and staff are vaccinated based on the submission of that form. We're excited about that. We strongly encourage you to continue to do that. The other thing is that we have put together a number of incentives for people who have filled out the form and indicated that they are vaccinated. There is a drawing coming up in a couple of weeks, and employees are eligible for a parking pass or funds on their 49er ID card or a night stay at our new Marriott Hotel and Conference Center. So again, I'm putting in the strong plug, get your vaccination.
All right, great. Absolutely. I love not completing my Niner health check every morning as well.
Yes.
So let's talk about everyone's favorite topic as well, face coverings. Can you clarify the university's position on wearing them on campus?
Yeah, well, we are continuing to follow both CDC and state guidelines. So if you are vaccinated, you do not have to wear them. If you are not vaccinated, you do have to wear them. Now, there is a asterisk caveat associated with that. What we have said is that in classrooms, because we don't know who's vaccinated, who's not, everybody in that classroom should wear a face mask. Again, if we've had some faculty say, well, if there's room and this sort of thing, there may be some exceptions to that if there's 6 feet of distance and this sort of thing. But the preference is in a confined space like a classroom, everybody just wear a mask. That's the simple thing, and we're doing that to ensure the health and safety of everyone involved. The other thing is that in your personal office space, that sort of thing, you could, in fact, choose as people are coming in to say, I prefer you wear a mask. What we don't want are disparate policies and guidelines across campus. So we've tried to be consistent. Vaccinated, no mask except in a classroom. Unvaccinated, you have to continue to wear a mask.
So following up on that, Chancellor Gaber, we've had several questions come in. People asking if it's possible that the university's position on face coverings could change again if CDC or local guidance changes. So, for example, maybe not wearing any masks or any face coverings in classrooms. Could you speak to that?
And what I'd tell you is everybody has been patient and understanding as we have followed the evolving guidelines that have continued to emerge. They will continue to emerge, and I ask for your patience going forward because, yes, it is possible the state, the system, the CDC could provide new guidelines associated with face masks, and we will continue to follow the prevailing guidance that we are receiving. Our goal is to keep our campus community healthy and safe, and along the way, get back to some semblance of normal. So again, unvaccinated, masks, vaccinated, not, except in some small confined spaces like a classroom, or if that's your preference in your office space.
Great. Well, I see several questions coming in through the chat function. We've got a team capturing those, and I would just encourage you to continue submitting your questions, and we're going to get to them in just a few minutes. We're going to move now to our medical director, Dr. Robert Jones. Dr. Jones, Chancellor Gaber referenced increasing vaccination rates and decreasing infection rates. Can you give us a brief update on where we are locally and nationally in the fight against COVID-19?
Sure. Thanks, Colleen. Good afternoon, everybody. So, as you know from the news and newspaper and all, the number of new cases per day is decreasing as more and more people get vaccinated. We've seen that both in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area as well as across the state and across the country as well. Some states are doing better than other states in that respect. In North Carolina, our number of new cases per day were up in the 2,500s back in late April. So the last few weeks of school. The peak for the month of May was 1,900, and we're at 600 or so new cases per day now in the second week of June. So we've come down precipitously over the last 6 weeks. I think we're doing a very, very good job. But likewise, the number of hospitalizations has also decreased. I mean, we were up around 1,000 back in April, 1,000 per day. We're in hospitals in the state, and we're down in the 500s now. So I think we're doing very well. More than 4 million North Carolinians have been fully vaccinated. A number more have gotten at least one shot, but 4.2 million have been fully vaccinated, which is just shy of 50%. And so I think the state has done a very good job. In the county, we're at about 42% fully vaccinated, and that's 467,000. So I think across the board, we've all done very well getting out, getting vaccinated, and at the same time, that decreasing the number of new cases. The thing, however, to keep in mind is that there are still variants out there, right? And so we don't want to lose sight of this. I think it's very easy to say, hallelujah, we have now, passed the threshold. We are good. We don't have to worry about this thing anymore. And I would say, not so fast, and at least to be able to continue to follow the guidelines and being careful so that we don't allow the variants that we're seeing starting to evolve to become a big problem here like they have become in other countries.
So Dr. Jones, it's certainly encouraging to see more and more individuals receiving vaccination, and you can see certainly the impact of that in our city, county, state. We're now really beginning to hear discussion around booster shots. Can you give us a little bit more around why this may or may not be necessary?
Sure. So booster shots, well, let me take a step back. It's our belief that viruses like this, so coronaviruses like this, don't impart lifelong immunity. There are certain diseases that do. These types of viruses do not. And so we know that at some point, our immunity will wane, whether you've gotten the disease, natural infection, or you've gotten the vaccine, that your immunity will wane at some point. At this point in time, we don't know exactly when that is. So the level of immunity looks to still be strong at 6 months and even as far out as 8 months. But we're thinking that sometime around the 10 to 12 month period, that immunity will start to wane some. And so the booster shot is a way of sort of reinvigorating that immunity for another period of time to be able to be protective on an ongoing basis. So to keep everyone covered, so to speak, by their immunity over a period of time, keeps the the virus from taking hold and starting up again. So it's similar to what we do with the flu vaccine, right? You get the flu vaccine every year. It's adjusted a little bit based on what the predominant types are. My thought is that the coronavirus vaccine will be similar to that. So, for instance, the big variant in the world right now is the Delta variant, the one that started in India and has really sort of taken off in the United Kingdom at this point. It's become a predominant strain there. As those variants evolve, using mRNA technology for the vaccine allows us to kind of fine tune the vaccine in a booster so that you have better coverage for newer variants that come out over time. And so likely at around the 10 to 12 month time, we'll be doing another round of vaccines known as boosters.
Great, thanks, Dr. Jones. I see some questions coming in through the chat function, so we may come back to you in a few minutes. We're going to keep moving so that we can get some questions related to academic affairs. So I'm going to go to Provost Lorden for these questions. Provost Lorden, first question that came in was looking ahead to the fall. Returning students have registered for classes and new students are in the process of registering for classes during SOAR. Are faculty members able to change their mind for their course delivery format from in-person to online for the semester?
Well, the short answer is no, not without justification and approval of the dean. I think what everybody wants, both students and faculty alike, is predictability. And so we want to stick with the schedule as published as closely as we possibly can. Now, that said, we're in an unpredictable situation. And so there may be cases in which, for medical reasons, a faculty member needs to receive accommodations, and certainly we will work with those faculty members. So requests for exceptions to in-person instructional assignments based on medical issues should be referred to Cindy Edwards, who is in HR. She is the employee relations manager. And determinations about how to handle those requests will be made on a case-by-case basis. We have to consider what the challenge is for the faculty member. Also, we have to think about whether or not the class can be offered effectively by remote means, and whether or not the faculty member can be reassigned to other classes, and whether we have someone who can step in to offer the class on a face-to-face basis. So it's a complicated series of assessments, and any determination would be made in collaboration with human resources, academic affairs, and the faculty members, academic department and dean.
Well, now let's talk about maybe the opposite side of that equation. Are faculty required to offer students a virtual option for an in-person class?
No, they're not. Again, we have a class schedule that's been published, and students are aware of the course delivery method when they register.
I saw a question come in the chat. If a course is registered as asynchronous today, could it go to in-person?
Well, I mean, as I said, we want to try to keep as close to the published schedule as we can and let both faculty and students understand what they're registering for. So we have tried to allow for the fact that some students, as well as some faculty, are for a variety of reasons not going to be able or comfortable with face-to-face instruction. And so there are a certain percentage of classes that are being offered through remote formats. So we're trying to stick with the schedule we have.
Okay, as Chancellor Gaber just discussed, we are requiring face masks for in-person classes currently underway on campus. So if students refuse to comply with this instruction, what should faculty members do?
Yeah, so last summer, the faculty developed a face mask policy, and I think it's been shared on most course syllabi. It is still in force, and students will still be held accountable under the Code of Student Responsibility. So that policy is published, and I would encourage faculty to read it and reference it on their syllabi. And I think it answers most of the questions about how to address objections from students.
Okay, great. If you have any other questions for Provost Lordan, please feel free to submit them in the chat function. We're going to keep moving, and we'll probably come back to her in a few minutes. We're going to move to Dr. Rick Tankersley, who's our Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development. So Dr. Tankersley, first question is, will the university still be conducting COVID-19 contact tracing or surveillance testing? And will being vaccinated exempt you from participating in this testing?
So thank you, Colleen, and good afternoon, everybody. And let me start with the second question first. And the answer, and going back to what the Chancellor mentioned earlier, is if you've been vaccinated, it exempts you from any surveillance testing that we'll be doing during the summer or during the fall or any time during the academic year next year. So again, it's one of the benefits of being vaccinated is that your name will be taken off that mitigation or surveillance testing as a result of that. We're going to continue to do contact tracing, have our contact tracing team on campus. You may be contacted by the contact tracing team if you happen to be identified as a close contact, but it would not, because you're vaccinated, you do not have to quarantine. You'll be notified of that and given some instructions, but it will not exempt you from contact tracing.
What about, can vaccinated employees still seek a voluntary COVID-19 test from the university if they are concerned?
Yeah, so we still have an active COVID testing lab on campus, the same lab that we had operational all during the academic year. There's a contact information that's available on the Niner Cares website that allows you to make an appointment if you think that you've been exposed or need to get a test. You can make an appointment if there's an appointment period available to you.
Another question, I know we've had a lot of success with wastewater testing and helping to mitigate any outbreaks. Will that continue this summer and into the fall?
So we plan to continue doing all the wastewater testing that we did last year. As you mentioned, Colleen, it was a very successful program, and one was integral to helping us monitor the presence of the virus on campus. And as much of the bad press that the Niner Health Check is getting today, it was also another way for us to monitor that. But what's good to know, and it parallels what Dr. Jones was saying, is that as we've seen the number of cases go down and the positivity rate go down in the area, we've also seen the presence of the virus and wastewater on campus go down. So all trends are going in the right direction.
That's great news. Again, if you've got questions at any time for Dr. Tankersley or anyone on the panel, you can submit them via the chat function. We're going to keep moving now to our Associate Vice Chancellor for Safety and Security, John Bogdan. John, let's start with something Chancellor Gaber referenced earlier. Employees being able to request others wear face coverings in their personal workspaces. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Certainly. Good afternoon, everyone. So, I mean, the bottom line is there's still folks that aren't necessarily comfortable around people without a mask, and if they feel like they're in close quarters in their personal workspace or their office, we think it's fine that they can tell folks that they'd prefer if they would wear a mask. We're having some stickers made up that if you want to put in your office that says masks preferred, to help with that. They'll be available around campus here in the future.
John, what about other spaces? Can offices or departments or buildings designate other areas as mask required locations?
Generally, no. We as the chancellor talked about, we ask that individual units and departments don't unilaterally come up with different policies. However, there are exceptions. She already talked about in classrooms and teaching labs. There's also requirements for masks still in the student health center and on public transit. If you're having a large function, indoor function in a conference room or a large meeting room, and you feel like it's not safe, you can't get people properly distanced, or you're concerned about the density of people in there, then you can require masks for that unique event. So an event planners are responsible for informing people of that, so they come and they're prepared for it. And I guess if anything else I would add on, that what we have seen throughout COVID is change, right? So everybody should expect that, these policies and these standards continue to morph as we move and they get better. That's what we've been seeing. And we hope for, continued progress to eventually move through everything.
So John, the Niner Health Check, I know that's a top of mind for everyone. Will it still be required, or what allows you to not have the Niner Health Check anymore?
So two simple processes. If you are not vaccinated, you will still be required to fill out the daily Niner Health Check. If you are vaccinated and you fill out the reporting form, you let us know, which is voluntary, then you will be exempt from the daily Niner health check. Now, you'll still get the Niner health check every day, because I already see the questions in the chat, and it's one we get all the time. But you won't get any reminders if you're not filling it out. It's there in case you become symptomatic or you have a reason to fill it out. Our objective is to work towards a reporting link, like on the Niner Nation Cares website or on the EM website, where you could go to and report if you needed to use it. But we're just not there yet. So until then, you're still going to get the daily health check. But if you have submitted your proof of vaccination and been approved, you do not have to fill it out.
Okay, great. I think that answers one of the questions that came up. We're going to move now to, I see a lot of questions around HR policies. So we're going to move to Gary Stennett, our Associate Vice Chancellor for Human Resources. Gary, first question for you. We've received a lot of questions. I see them in the chat as well about teleworking. Can you clarify if teleworking is still allowed at the university?
Well, let me parse that out pretty carefully, if I might. And let's start with sort of restating the intent. The intent for July is to get ready for the fall semester. The intent is to begin to try and have our campus look like, be like, act like as close to pre-pandemic as we can. We've had approximately 65% of our staff on any given day, primarily teleworking. That statistic is simply unsupportable as we move forward into the fall and into preparations for the fall. So the intent is effective July 6th for the campus to, for those who were working full-time on campus pre-pandemic, to anticipate that that's where their place of work will be. Now, having said that, let me just clarify that we're one of only, believe it or not, only a few UNC campuses that had a flexible work policy in place prior to the pandemic. University Policy 101.22 has been referenced many times over the past year or so. And the policy on balance fits and works well. It outlines the responsibilities for both employees and supervisors. And we have learned some things, obviously, over the last year and a half that will allow us to make some informed modifications to that policy. Not many, but some. For instance, to clarify the importance of IT security and some of those things, to clarify some systems guidance that has been provided to all the chancellors from the president and the system about the expectation that we will not have many employees working out of a commutable area or out of state, and where such compelling circumstances exist, that for faculty, they certainly would be coordinated and reviewed and approved by the provost, Joan Lorden, and for any staff that I would be the review process and the approver for any such recommendations. But I need to affirm that those circumstances will be very rare and would only be approved under the most compelling circumstances. Any approved arrangement for flexible work, whether it's 4 10s, 4 9s, a half day on Friday, which all those things already currently exist in policy, or any teleworking arrangements that are a consistent recurring thing, 1 or 2 days, perhaps, that there has to be an operational need that supports that arrangement, and they have to be reviewed and approved by management, and frankly, that they can be revoked at any time or changed. The reality is that teleworking is not a right, it's not an entitlement, but it is a tool, and it's a tool that might be used at some points where it makes sense based on a particular department's business. But most people should anticipate that they will be here. They will be here most of the time. Full-time teleworking arrangements probably will be very few and far in between.
So Gary, I think I've heard you say this a couple times, but formal, really, if you want to telework, a formal agreement needs to be established between you and your manager. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you asked that question. In the policy, it calls for a formal agreement. That process is outlined, the forms outlined. Again, we might make some modifications to that, but on balance, that is the process. It will be approved up through the respective vice chancellor, or in the cases of colleges, the dean. Then it will come to HR. We will review it and keep track of those documents. All through this pandemic, people may not know this, but we've had to report regularly to the system and beyond the system on the numbers of our employees who are teleworking, primarily working off-site. And so we've captured that data in Banner, and that's how we've tried to report that. I anticipate that reporting interest from state level will continue. So we do ask people's patience with us when we have to occasionally seek clarifications on some of those kinds of things.
So Gary, a question came in around COVID-19 leave. Will that still be available to employees this summer and into the fall?
Well, COVID-19 leave, or as we think of paid administrative leave, currently still exists. It will exist most likely at least through June 30th. Frankly, when that goes away and to what degree that goes away sort of depends on whether or not the governor lifts the state of emergency. To the extent that continues in place, there may be some felt need from the state through the system for some of those special leaves to continue. I will point out that we implemented the COVID-19 special leave, which has been used considerably by some employees who got into a situation where they had outused their family medical leave or other kinds of leaves. And many employees were very gracious to donate thousands of hours of their own personal leave for that purpose. I anticipate that leave bank, which now is not being used very much at all, that we might decommission it in July and August, but we could always reinstitute that if we had to, and the authority stayed in place.
Okay, great. Well, Gary, one more question for you. And again, I encourage you to submit questions via the chat function, and we're going to get to them here in about a minute. Will all leaves still be able to be used interchangeably?
Well, that's a question that's been of great interest to many employees. It's continued, obviously, through the end of June. I can tell you that the UNC system was granted authority in recently approved legislation that allows for the system to determine to continue that. They've not yet officially announced that to the campuses, but I have it on pretty good authority that they probably expect to extend that interchangeable use of leave at least through the end of August. And whether or not it continues beyond that will depend on an assessment made at that time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gary. Okay, we're now going to move into the questions that are top of your mind, anything that you've submitted in the chat function. Again, you can submit questions at any time, and we're capturing those, and we'll ask our panelists here in the remaining 30 minutes that we have, and we're going to get to as many questions as we can. So the first one, we'll start off with Chancellor Gaber and go back to her. Chancellor Gaber, for vaccination, Could you please clarify if the 60% number you referenced was for students, faculty, and staff, or just faculty and staff?
The number I referenced was for faculty and staff.
60%, nearly 60% vaccinated.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, great. John Bogdan, we're going to go back to you. There's a couple of questions around safety on campus. The first one is, can you clarify if offices or departments can request people to wear masks in their main office areas or just in individual spaces?
It's just in personal individual office spaces.
So not like entryways or lobbies, for example.
Correct.
Second question I have for you, John. Can you confirm the university's recommendation that individuals use cloth face coverings and not face shields?
Yes. That's in accordance with the CDC guidance. A cloth face covering is what is meant by a face covering. They've said some time now that face shields are not a substitute for that. What you can wear one in addition to it if you feel safer by that, but it's not a substitute for a cloth face covering.
Okay, great. What about if you are unvaccinated? Do you have to wear a mask outside on campus?
Outside, no. Outside, there's the across the state, the governors removed the mask requirement.
Okay, great. Two more questions for you, John, that I see. Are offices able to host receptions or gatherings this summer and in the fall?
I would say that's like anything else that we've talked about. You have to take it a case-by-case basis. But if you feel that you can safely gather and it doesn't pose a risk, then yes, I think you can get together as necessary.
Okay, one last question for you, John. What other options do we employees have if we feel uncomfortable with providing an electronic copy of our vaccination card?
Okay, yes. So we had a few folks ask about that. And what we've done is we've established 2 dates. I don't want to get this wrong. Chris, if I screw this up, jump in. But Tuesdays and Thursdays in the Union and in Cone. I think it's Tuesdays is the Union. I'm looking at Chris, he's shaking his head. And Thursdays in Cone in the afternoon. Kevin Martin will be set up there with a table. And you can come and show him physically your vaccination card if you're concerned about recording a copy of it. And from there he'll enter in the necessary information to get you exempt.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks. We're going to move on to Provost Lorden. There's a couple of questions for her. Again, you can continue to submit questions via the chat function at any time. Provost Lorden, could faculty make a reverse decision to switch from remote or synchronous remote delivery to in-person? I believe you said the answer is no. We're trying to keep the schedule consistent as it is, but can you just clarify that point?
Yeah, that is what I said. We want to have a predictable schedule for students as they register. There are some students who, for a variety of reasons, would prefer remote offerings, just as there are faculty who would prefer to deliver their courses remotely. So to the extent that we can keep things predictable, that's what we want to do.
Okay, great. One more question that's come in through the chat. Can you clarify if instructors are required to wear masks while teaching?
So the answer is yes, but we recognize that as faculty are vaccinated, and in some of our classrooms, there is adequate space so that a faculty member who is vaccinated could be more than 6 feet away from the nearest student. If the students are comfortable with the faculty member removing a mask, and if it facilitates the class, then I think yeah, you could, an instructor could remove a mask, but I mean, it's a judgment call. So for somebody who's vaccinated and is in a large space and is sufficiently distanced from students, and if the students are comfortable with it, I would say the answer is yes.
Okay, great. Again, you can continue to submit questions via the chat function. I see a question here for our Director of Emergency Management, Chris Gonier. So I'm going to go over to him for this question. Chris, the Chancellor answered that approximately 60% of faculty and staff are vaccinated. We know that through our reporting form. What percentage of students are vaccinated currently?
Hi, thanks, Colleen. So I think like with everything with numbers related to COVID, it's, a yes or no simple answer, not necessarily the case. There's a lot of nuance. So we're still working through, as many of you know that are familiar with the banner system and other sort of systems on campus, we're still working through the transition of students moving from active enrolled to inactive. And is it inactive because they've graduated or they're just not enrolled in summer classes? What I can say is overall, active enrolled students for the 2 summer sessions, we're at about 25% vaccinated. I think we all suspect that number is considerably higher than that, but we're aware of 25%. When you dig into the weeds a little bit more, so when we look at things like what is the percentage campus student residents that are vaccinated, it's considerably higher. So we're approaching 50% of our on-campus resident student population. And that's consistent with what we saw when, there's not as many students living on campus on the summer, but that number is consistent with what we saw at the end of the spring semester when there were larger numbers of student residents living on campus.
Okay, great, thanks, Chris. I see a question actually here for Amy Hisler, our Associate Controller. So I'm going to go to her for this question, and it's about travel. Everyone's anxious to get out there and start traveling again. So when will faculty and staff be able to engage in travel, including international travel again?
I was wondering when we're going to do this one. I know everybody's super excited to get back out on the road, and unfortunately, we don't have a specific date where we're going to be wide open again. You can always submit your international travel requests through the travel petition and have it go through those approvals if need be, if it's a necessary travel engagement at this point. But we're still in a bit of a holding pattern for it being wide open. That's what we've got right now, unfortunately. As soon as we know, you will know, because we know everybody is quite anxious to get right back out there and resume what normal was. So no news to share beyond what we shared a couple weeks ago.
So Amy, just follow up on that. I see the question come in the chat feature. Is domestic travel approved?
Provided it is necessary to meet research and academic requirements or essential to university business. And that's going to lie with your Vice Chancellor's approval through the end of June and then back to normal starting July 1. We will not be in travel denying things that your Vice Chancellor or your supervisors have approved. So it's going to be on that department level once we get to July 1.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to John Bogdan. There's a question here, and then there's some questions for Gary from an HR perspective. So John, let me start one with a quick question for you. What are the policies expected to be around, whether it's medium to large in-person events on campus in the fall? Will there be capacity limits? And for events that draw thousands of people, are we able to have large events like that in person on campus this fall?
Okay, so I guess in a word, there are no more capacity limits, and it's really about judgment and safety. Great example, at commencements, right as the kind of the rules were changing, but they had already opened up for no masks required outside. But since we had about 4,000 people in the stands, we still were encouraging people to wear masks as, as an additional safety measure. And I'm certain we'll see more of that, over the next few months as we start to gather again in larger quantities and as we still work to get out of the pandemic.
Okay, great. Gary, I'm going to go to you for these a couple of HR questions. The first is, you had mentioned the teleworking policy was going to be updated. Will it be updated before July 6th?
Some of it's in draft now. I'm not sure it will be fully vetted and around for everybody's input by then. The modifications are going to be modest. It's not going to change much that's in there now. It's just going to attempt to clarify a few points that I've addressed some of those already. Out of state work, out of commutable area work, IT security. Mike Carlin and his security staff are encouraging some tightening up of some of that language with respect to that. So it's not something that people need to wait on. You can use the policy as it currently exists, and it's probably a good 95 to 98% close.
Okay, great, Gary. One more question that came in for you is, if a full department determines that 1 to 2 days remote is allowable and maintains their operational responsibilities, does each individual staff member need to have an approved teleworking agreement, or is this at the discretion of the supervisors?
The expectation is that any employee who's on an extended, continued, regular, flexible arrangement, 1 or 2 days would be such, should have in place such an agreement, and not a blanket campus or a blanket department-wide approach.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gary. I'm going to go to Provost Lorden for this question. It's around travel, and so it's will study abroad be allowed for students this fall semester?
Well, the Office of International Programs is looking at that question. Right now, it would be very difficult for most students to get visas. We are putting together the guidelines for study abroad. I know we have a lot of students who want to study abroad. We will require students who want to study abroad to be vaccinated. And we will be following the CDC guidance for any kind of international travel. And so, looking at the status of those countries with respect to coronavirus. So there's no simple answer right now.
Okay, great. I see a question coming in, so I'm going to go to our Director of Building and Environmental Services, Brian Guns. Brian, is our indoor air being filtered and or monitored?
Thanks, Colleen. Yes, it is filtered, and the air that is mixed with it from the outside, the outdoor air, is monitored to get a good mix of clean, fresh air from the outside.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. Gary, a question came in for you just based on a follow-up. So if an employee lives in South Carolina, but in a commutable distance, are they still able to apply to work remotely 2 days per week?
Well, we've had hundreds of employees that live in South Carolina. That's not changed. That's not going to change. That's certainly within the commutable distance. Any flexible arrangement, such as 1 or 2 days, a hybrid approach, or whatever, will require approval by the department head and the respective vice chancellor. It's going to be very important. Again, let me just point out that we currently have 65% of our staff working remotely. That's not supportable at that level. And it's going to be very important ultimately for vice chancellors to know what's going on inside all the departments of their divisions so they can appropriately judge how much flexibility they think is appropriate.
Great, thanks, Gary. I see one more question that's come in through the chat function, so I'm going to go back to Chancellor Gaber for this question. We've been saying for, I think for several weeks now, around this July 6th date of the return to on-campus work environment. Can you clarify if a department director is allowed to select a later return date than July 6th for a full office return if no loss of service is expected?
Well, thanks. I think we've been saying it since March. Short answer, no. We're expecting everybody back on campus July 6th. I think everybody here knows that, and Gary just made the point, we're shifting back, we're coming back together. It's going to be a change in the way we've all operated, and it's bringing back our campus culture and life. And we need to start re-engaging with one another to be able to work collectively and move the institution forward. So we recognize there will be individual arrangements to accommodate people, but again, as an institution, we need to come back together, pull together, and be able to move forward.
Well, great. Thanks, Chancellor Gaber. Well, on that note, I would agree that it's great to see everyone in 3D, and seeing people in person really is wonderful again. So I highly encourage, looking forward to seeing everyone back on campus. Thanks again for attending today's session. You can join us again on June 25th, where we will have another employee town hall with any questions that are on your mind. Again, if we didn't get to your question today for some reason, we will make sure that we get back to you or put this on our FAQ section for Niner Nation Cares. As a reminder, today's Zoom call was recorded and will be on the Niner Nation Cares website as soon as possible. And again, the Niner Nation Cares website, ninernationcares.uncc.edu, is your source for the latest information and FAQs on the fall plan. Thank you again for joining us today, and go Niners.